Hi, thanks, Linda, and thanks to OPAG for inviting me and the Decadal co-chairs, Phil Christensen, Robin Canup, to speak to you today. So I'm going to give a quick presentation, giving you the current status, and then we'll try and answer your questions. So can I have the next slide, please? And that's the co-chairs who are well known now. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so the Decadal survey, like any National Academies study, is governed by a document called the Statement of Task, and it's negotiated between the academies and the sponsor of any particular project. So this Statement of Task was negotiated between the academies and NASA and the National Science Foundation. And it's posted on the website that you can see there. But this document is very important because it tells exactly what the sponsors expect the academies to do in the survey, and it basically sets the limits. You do what's in the Statement of Task. If you do more than that, then you'll get into trouble and the report may never see the light of day. And if you don't do everything in the Statement of Task, you may suffer the same fate. So now my slides have disappeared. Okay, so they've come back. So in addition to the Statement of Task, the sponsors gave us another couple of documents. They're also posted on this website, and they go by the names of Scope, Considerations, Approach. There's another one called Products. And these contain suggestions from the sponsors as to how to make our ultimate report as useful as possible. But the items in these other documents, they're not binding on the survey committee. They're good advice, but we don't have to do exactly what they say. Next, please, Kunio. Okay, so the Statement of Task is very similar to the one with the last Decadal survey, Vision and Voyages, but it includes basically an overview of the relevant disciplines that make up planetary science and astrobiology. Broad survey of current state of knowledge, inventory of top-level questions. Would they ask us for recommendations on optimal balance defined in multiple dimensions? So it's between different parts of the solar system, between large, medium, small missions, ground and space-based, mission-type activities, and research and analysis-type activities. So we want to maintain a balance in those things, and we need to give some advice on how that should be done. We're asked to assess infrastructure, which is particularly important for NSF. We wanted to discuss the technology development needs, and of course, they want us to identify and rank the top large and medium space missions, so things that used to be called flagships and the New Frontiers missions, if we want to prioritize them that way. And then, of course, we give recommendations on other initiatives, ground-based activity, research-type activities, and so on. Next, please. So there are some things that are new this time around. The Statement of Task gives a higher profile to astrobiology and planetary defense. Now, astrobiology was certainly included in the last Decadal survey, and it was also included in the first one. But the high profile is evident in just the name of the survey. It's the survey on planetary science and astrobiology. Planetary defense really wasn't discussed in the last survey. We did discuss near-Earth object surveys, but we didn't really take the other aspects of planetary defense into any sort of consideration. The sponsors asked for that our recommendations be clearly traceable to the goals and objectives we define. There's more prominence given to the use and definition of decision rules to accommodate what needs to happen to our recommendations if the background changes. So if the budget isn't what we expect, or if it's more than we expect, or if there are new discoveries or technological developments. Basically, these are rules to interpret the survey if the circumstances change from what they are when we write it in a year or so. We're asked to take a closer look at human exploration activities undertaken by NASA and its international partners. There's a very heavy emphasis on multidisciplinary collaboration, both within NASA SMD, across the different NASA directorates, between different federal agencies and between NASA and its international partners and the private sector. And then another innovation this time around is we're asked to consider issues related to the state of the profession. This is something we haven't done before. The astronomers have typically done this in their surveys, but I expect this will be a standard item in all future decadal surveys conducted by the other science disciplines for NASA and NSF and their other partners. So next, please. So something is going to be different this time around is that early discussions with the co-chairs led to the decision that the survey will be organized around cross-cutting science themes and priority questions. So what this means basically, the survey report, unlike Vision and Voyages, will not have individual chapters devoted to particular planetary bodies. The survey report and the individual chapters in it will be organized around priority science questions. So what are those questions? We don't know at the moment, but our model is what was called Table 3.1 in Vision and Voyages. So one of the first tasks the surveys needs to come up with is to define its own version of Table 3.1. So if you have the next slide, please, you'll see what Table 3.1 looked like. So next, please. Okay, so this is Table 3.1 reformatted to fit this screen. So basically it defined 3 cross-cutting science themes, and then there are 10 priority questions that derive from them. So our goal early in the survey this time around is to come up with our equivalent of these statements. So whether there are 3 or 4 cross-cutting themes, and whether there are 10 or 12 or 15 priority questions, that's TBD. Next, please. Another innovation this time around is that we've given a heavier emphasis to engaging early career professionals in the survey. So to that end, we've had 3 online events so far. The first was supposed to take place at LPSC, and it moved online after the conference was cancelled. So that first one basically was just an introduction to the decadal survey itself. The next event was in May, and it was focused on white papers and how important they are, how to approach writing them, how the survey uses them, etc. And then the last one was at the beginning of June, and this included perspectives and lessons learned from past surveys across the space science disciplines. All those events are archived, and you can relive them if you wish by going to those 3 different URLs. Each of them had about 340, 350 participants. Next, please. Okay, so some key dates. So the survey officially began on the 20th of March. That was basically when we received the funding to undertake the survey from NASA. We're still awaiting funding from NSF. A proposal is working its way through the NSF process, so we expect to get it sometime in the future months. We don't really need it at this point. We do need it downstream because it helps with things like publishing the survey report. We initiated a public nomination site. When it closed on the 1st of May, we had 347 nominations. Of those, about 300 were unique. Some people proved to be very popular and had multiple nominations. These nominations proved to be very useful as we were started our discussions of the membership of the survey committee and the panels itself. The co-chairs were announced in mid-May. And then, as has already been mentioned earlier today, we staggered our deadlines for our white papers as a result of comments we got from the community. So when the science white paper deadline passed on the 15th of July, we'd had 333, though there's some duplicates in there, and we haven't quite figured them all out yet. Then there was a second deadline for mission-related white papers. We got 96 more. And then when I checked yesterday, we had a total of 434. Again, there are some duplicates. And we're expecting more when the deadline for all the other white papers on technology, state of the profession and so on, comes by in 2 weeks' time. So what is the schedule going forward? We expect to have the steering group members appointed. I say here August, September. August has passed. We didn't quite make that. I expect the steering group to be appointed soon, very soon. The panel members will be appointed in the weeks after the survey committee members are. And then the only date mentioned in our contract with NASA and NSF is that we deliver the report at by the end of the first quarter of 2022. And the only other date mentioned is our contract with NASA expires at the end of the first quarter of 2023. So that allows for not quite a year's worth of dissemination activities and to get the word out to the community. So you'll see that between items number 9 and 10, there's basically 18 months. So what happens then? So if we go to the next slide, please. This is our current rough idea of how our work will break down. So we can break the survey down roughly into 8 steps. And now 3 of these are rate determining. These are times when the survey is relying on outside contributors to do things for us. So the first of those comes, I hope, towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, when the panels and the survey committee itself identify what additional mission studies might be needed to complement those that were done through the PMCS process or were done via other mechanisms such as the Ice Giants flagship, the Venera D study, and so on. Laurie Glaze has promised us the resources to do maybe another 10 of those studies like those, if we wish, but we need to identify them early in the process because they're going to take some months to do, and while they're being done, we need to basically address other issues. So the other rate determining step comes further down, maybe sometime in the late spring of next year, maybe the spring of next year. And that is, there's a legal requirement that all decadal surveys that have the recommend missions have to have those missions independently evaluated for cost and technical realism. So last time around in Vision and Voyages, we hired the Aerospace Corporation to do that validation. We will hire a contractor again this time to do that same step. We will set about hiring that group sometime probably early next year. But while the concepts that we're most interested in are being evaluated for this cost and technical realism, that takes time as well. And so again, we have to do other things. And then the final rate determining step comes right at the end. And this is where the Academy reviews the report we draft. So we hope to draft this report by the autumn of 2021, and it will go out to review probably, I would guess now, October 2021. It'll go to a group of reviewers who are appointed using a mechanism that's very similar to the appointment of the members of the Decadal Survey Committee and panels and so on. So if people want to volunteer, they can, but don't send me names yet. Send me names in 6 months, please. So the reviewers get given a period of time to do their reviews. There may be as many as 20 reviewers. I believe I had 18 last time. The microgravity decadal survey that came out a few years ago had 36 reviewers. So there are a lot of people looking at the report, and not all of them do their reviews on time. So we might give them a deadline, but if people come in late, usually we have to swallow that in our schedule. The committee then responds to those reviewer comments, and then the committee's responses and the revised report gets sent to a third-party adjudicator. This is somebody appointed by the academies to look at the reviewer comments and the committee's responses and determine whether the committee has been responsive to the comments. And we've dealt with each and every one of the comments appropriately. So that's, again, that's somewhere where we lose control of the schedule. Those guys can take, you know, days to weeks to come up with their adjudication. And then the report is, we hope, approved. And then we will release it to the sponsors. My guess now will be early in March of 2022. And our plan is still to try and release it at LPSC later that month, March 2022. So if we can go to the next one, please. I'll just say a few words about the committee nominations and how the committee members were appointed and are being appointed as we speak, and the process used. So I mentioned earlier that we had the public nomination website with the 300 or so unique nominations. That proved to be very useful. We really mined that resource when we came to put the panels together. We also, as we do with every study at the academies, we go to the academy, the sections in the 3 academies. Each section, which is basically each science discipline, has a liaison who is, we tell them we're going to do this study. Can you suggest members of the 3 academies who might be suitable? We also, so that process was undertaken. We went to members of the Space Studies Board, the Aeronautics and Space Engineering Board, and asked them for suggestions. And then we had the Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science, which is the guardian of Vision and Voyages, and also the organizing committee for this survey, held a meeting not quite a year ago, at which we discussed many aspects of the survey. One of the things we spent quite a bit of time on was looking at potential names for people to fill leadership positions. And then there were some additional members who were nominees were identified to fill in gaps in areas that weren't represented in the items 1, 2, and 3. And then the co-chairs and me and my colleagues have held an extensive series of conference calls with Phil and Robin throughout May and June, and actually probably into July, to sort through the various nominees and finalize the list of nominations. So we came up with a list of nominations for the survey committee or the steering group, or this, which the terms are interchangeable, which is basically the leadership group, which is where Phil and Robin sit, and it's the group that will determine the final priorities in the report, and then a number of supporting panels who will help us write the report. And the panels, each panel has its own chair and also a vice chair, and the vice chair sits as a member of the steering group and acts as basically the link between the steering group and the panel. And then when we've written all this up, it goes through a complicated review process. Each panel has its own nomination process. It's all written up. The document, the nomination memo is about 5,000 words long for each panel. And it works its way up through the hierarchy in the National Academies, works through the Space Studies Board, through our parent division, and then it eventually ends up in the Academy's executive office, ultimately on the desk of Marcia McNutt, the president of the National Academy of Sciences, and she does the final sign-off. Nothing is final until Marcia approves it. And what everybody is basically looking for is an appropriate range of expertise to undertake the task. balance of perspectives, a very close look at diversity, and careful screening for potential conflicts of interest. And we are in the middle of process number 6 as we speak. The next slide, please. I think that's the last. Yep, so that's the website. As I mentioned, since we are in the middle of the adjudication of our nominees, we won't be able to say very much as to who they are or what the panel structure is going to be. And, but we expect to have news for the community sometime soon. And at that point, I'm going to shut up and turn it over to Phil and Robin.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes, great. I think Phil is not online. He tried to log on earlier and somehow got cut off, and I don't think they've been able to get him back online. He has emailed me and asked me to extend his apologies. They'll probably keep trying to have him come online, but I will speak on our behalf. So before we get into the Q&A, we wanted to start by saying how deeply honored and truly very excited we are to be chairing this effort. The Decadal is, of course, of fundamental importance to our field. This is our opportunity to come together to identify the most important scientific questions that we hope can be answered in the next decade, and to identify the data, the observations, and the missions that we think will be best able to answer those questions. Essentially, this is our time as a community to be able to establish the intellectual framework for the planetary science efforts over the next 10 years by NASA and NSF. So this is an extremely important effort. We know this is coming at a very challenging time. Most of us are facing quite a number of unprecedented work and personal, perhaps, challenges. And given that, Phil and I wanted to extend an extremely great thank you to everyone online and to the entire community for the overwhelming response we've received in detailed white papers from the community, which of course is a first step in our decadal process. We've received white papers now on science topics and mission concepts, and to date we've gotten over 430 of them. So thank you so much. For comparison, this is already more than twice the number of white papers received on the prior planetary decadal. And we're not done yet. We have a final round of white papers relating to all issues of concern to the decadal and its statement of task beyond just science or mission concepts that will be due on September 15th. And so we are anxiously awaiting seeing those white papers as well. Thank you to all of you for your efforts as Phil and I are reading the white papers that we have. It's inspiring to see not only the abundance of ideas and enthusiasm, but to know the tenacity and the dedication that it took on everyone's part to get these papers submitted when you did. Thank you so much. They will form the core of the beginning of our process. Thank you. As David mentioned, we have been working hard the last few months to identify prospective decadal committee members. In total, this is of order 100 individuals. We think that this is an absolutely incredible set of people that is talented and diverse in many different ways and fully reflects the great breadth of knowledge and diversity of our field. We're very excited to be able to introduce them to you once those appointments are approved. As David mentioned, we are in the midst of that Academy's approval process right now. And so I will apologize in advance that there may be some questions that come up during Q&A that David or myself, if they relate to specific issues of panel membership or panel structure, we may not be able to answer right now. We hope that the appointments and the panel structure are going to be released soon. Notably, the steering committee, we hope, will be released in the next few weeks. So let's see if I missed any of our other introductory points. Yeah, I think that's what Phil and I had hoped to introduce with. And so I'm glad to proceed on to Q&A if we're set up to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin, and thank you, David, for your information and presentations. Let's see, Morgan, do you want to look at the questions in the Google Docs?
Hi, yes, happy to start to read out these questions. The first one is from Julie Rathbun at PSI. She asks, when will the detailed panel structure be announced? In particular, the slides say that the panels will be organized around science themes and priority questions based on Table 3.1 in UV. Visions and Voyages did not include the state of the profession in its statement of task, while the 2023 survey does. So how will the panel structure enable the survey committees to accomplish that part of its task, specifically the state of the profession?
Okay, so let me step back a little bit and talk, expand on what David said during his talk. We're going to handle things a little differently in this decadal than the last decadal. So in the last decadal, we had destination or object-oriented panels. For example, there was a satellites panel and there was a Mars panel. And then we maintained that structure in the actual decadal report. So the satellites panel wrote a satellites chapter, and the Mars panel wrote a Mars chapter. In this decadal, we're not going to have that one-to-one correspondence between the panels and the chapters in the reports. The chapters in the reports are what David described. They are going to be organized thematically. So these are the chapters in the reports, okay? So by thematic, we mean both science themes. So these are going to be cross-cutting, high-level science questions. And one of the first tasks of the steering group will be to agree upon these questions. But example types of questions that these might be are things like the formation of the solar system, or the creation and maintenance of potentially habitable environments. Those are just hypothetical, okay? But that gives you a sense of what I mean by cross-cutting scientific themes. In addition to the scientific themes, the report will also have focus chapters on all of the other aspects of our statement of task that are not covered directly by those science themes, okay? So that includes things like the state of the profession, which is focused on equity, diversity, and inclusivity themes, among others, technology, potential collaboration within NASA, within the different science directorates, between NASA and SF, the relationship of science and human exploration. Okay, so each of these topics in the statement of task the major ones, will likely end up having its own chapter in the final report. Okay, and these chapters are they're again not going to have one-to-one correspondence to our panel structure the way most of the chapters did in the prior decadal. So what this means is when we actually write the report and we have a chapter on, say, the origin of the solar system or habitability and the state of the profession, each of those chapters is going to have contributors from, in all likelihood, all of the panels and the steering group, depending on individual expertise and interest across all those individuals. So in this way, the actual writing of the report and the chapter structure is going to be much more fluid than it has been in the past. And it's going to allow for people that sit on different panels and the steering group to be contributing to different chapters and likely to multiple chapters. So when we cover issues like EDI issues, which we know there's a huge, we can tell from the emails we're receiving, there's a huge interest in these issues at a background level in our community. And of course, awareness of and sensitivity to these issues has increased markedly in the last 6 months as well. Okay, so we hear you, we are taking these issues very seriously, and we're building in how we're going to treat these issues early on in the process, and indeed into our selection of our prospective individuals that will sit on the panel and on the steering committee. So as we address issues like this, and as we've been putting together the potential membership, we have been building in our mind a total group of people that cumulatively have the expertise to address all of the issues in our statement of task. Where they sit on a particular panel or steering group is not as constraining, you could say, as it has been in the past, because of the fluid structure we're going to use to write the report. And indeed, one of the benefits of the remote work situation that we all find ourselves in right now is it's actually very amenable to these types of fluid and flexible group arrangements for drafting the final report. So without getting into the details of the panel structure and or membership that we're not unfortunately free to talk about right now, hopefully that gives you an idea. So the high level answer is, across all of the people we've put together to comprise the panels and the steering committee are people that have the expertise and the passion for all of the issues that we're called upon to speak to in our statement of task.
Okay, great. The next question by Moses Malazzo from Other Orb LLC was on a very similar topic to Julie's. So we'll let him give us any other inputs if he felt that his question wasn't addressed. So I'm going to move on. The next one is by James Keane at JPL. He says, I applaud the early career activities performed just far. I found them very useful, and based on the large number of attendees, the community may agree. Will there be future early career activities as the Decadal starts to ramp up?
Why don't I take that one? We're not planning any more at this time, but as we began to think about who we needed to populate the steering group and the various panels, we were very mindful that there are a lot of very talented early career individuals out there, and so we set a ground rule for each panel and the steering group itself, that we needed to have a minimum number of early career individuals to serve on the committee. And we defined early career to be less than 10 years since PhD. And we told each panel that they had to have a certain number of early career people. And in fact, they excelled, and we have a very high, we have amongst the group of people we're trying to get appointed right now, a very high proportion of people in the early career, including maybe at least one panel chair, maybe two. But in terms of if organized events like the 3 we had so far, probably not, but we will have workshops at, town halls at future meetings such as the DPS and AGU and probably LPSC next year. If people are interested in proposing other early career events that they might find useful, well, then we can take a look at them, but we don't have any plans at the moment.
Okay, thank you, David. We have 2 more questions so far, encouraging others to please add in your questions if you have any. The next question is from Serena Diniega at JPL. She says, thank you for sharing information about how panelists are selected. Exactly what is included under balance of perspectives and close look at diversity? And when will there be a chance for the community to provide comments on panel composition? With respect to both individuals and overall panel composition, that all relevant areas of expertise are covered. It was mentioned in a much earlier presentation that there would be a comment period.
Okay, well, I guess I'm the best person to answer this. So let me take the last piece of Serena's question first. So every National Academy study has at its very outset a public comment period. So once a committee is appointed formally by the National Academies, their names are posted on a website, and basically a countdown starts, a 20-day countdown. During that period, the public or anybody public can make comments as to whether or not the committee is appropriately constituted to do its task. Each of those comments will get responded to. The final arbiter of whether a committee is appropriately constituted is that committee itself. So at a very early meeting of the steering group and each of the panels, we will have a discussion as to whether or not that group of individuals thinks they have the right composition to undertake the task at hand. And if they decide that they do, then we carry on. And if they decide we don't, then we make adjustments. But there's a 20-day comment period. It's for the Decadal survey and for every other Academy study. In terms of the dimensions of diversity, the Academy looks at basically everything you could consider from do we have an appropriate number of Academy members? Do we have an appropriate range and distribution of ages? Do we have geographical diversity? Do we have subject diversity? Do we have adequate representation of underrepresented groups? There are others, and my mind's going blank, but there are about a dozen of them, and they often create problems in satisfying all of them when we put together a group. Thankfully, with a group as large as the Decadal survey, and with 90 plus people involved, it's a lot easier to satisfy all those requirements. So the group we are proposing is extremely diverse in all of those dimensions.
And I just want to follow up on what Dave indicated. We're extremely excited by the group of potential members that we put together. It is very diverse, and you know, one of our big concerns was how was our process going to be affected by the various stresses that people in our community are under right now that were obviously unanticipated. And I think in the course of speaking to people about their willingness to participate in this process, I can only remember 2 instances of people that said that they would like to participate, but they had to decline because of current circumstances. In both cases, it was related to the additional burdens on university professors associated with remote teaching. So we've gotten incredible positive feedback from the community, and thank you for that, for all of you who have said yes when we've asked if you would be willing to serve, if formally asked. And we feel really positive about the group we've put forward, and we think it's going to provide a great basis to develop a true community consensus report.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Thank you, David. Our next question comes from Tom Spilker, a consultant. He asks, in the last PSDS's independent cost evaluations, the lack of iteration on mission cost drivers caused significant unintended consequences. Will iteration between study teams and the costing team be allowed this time?
Okay, I guess that one's for me. Basically, the simple answer is I don't know. There are pluses and minuses for doing that type of iteration. I would disagree with Tom that there were significant issues. One panel had issues, of one of 5 panels had issues, and that caused them some problems. But the issue with the academy is if we the missions that go out for the independent evaluation is basically our list of finalists. It's our short list of what's going to be in the final report. And the academy is very jealous about guarding its recommendations until everything has been through the complete review process and all the boxes have been checked and everything has been signed off on. If we start iterating with project teams, then we're basically signaling to at least a subset of the community what our final recommendations might include. And that is problematic.
Understood. Thank you, David. We have one final question, but it does look like a couple more may be coming in. This question is from Ian Cohen at APL. Ian asks, is there a plan or effort to have panel members from communities from other space disciplines or divisions, such as astrophysics, heliophysics, and/or earth science?
I guess that one's for me as well. We don't formally have anything like that, although when you can finally see them, if you look among the people we are nominating, there are people who straddle boundaries between different communities. So we have people, we are proposing people who work in astrophysics as well as planetary science. We have people who work in earth science as well as planetary science. We don't have identified liaisons to other communities, but the people we have appointed, as Robin said, one of the characteristics we really looked for when we were searching through the various nominees is people who are very broad, and so I think we will have people who have links and roots into not just those science communities, but other relevant communities, such as the human exploration community, and also the international community, because our membership that we are proposing includes people from outside the United States.
Absolutely. And actually, that's something else that has been helped by the remote nature of our meetings, because it's obviously much easier for our international colleagues to participate in meetings. We'll have to be cognizant and very flexible with meeting times and various time zones, but removing the burden of international travel has enabled and will enable, I think, a great deal of international participation.
Okay, thank you, David and Robin. We have one final question from Shannon McKenzie at APL. Shannon asks, what are the external reviewers looking for in their review of the survey report?
Okay, I guess that's another one for me. What the reviewers look for is basically has the committee in its report been responsive to what they were asked to do in the statement of task. If something is in the statement of task, then it needs to be in the final report, and it needs to be clearly found in the final report. So if there are 10 questions in the statement of task, I guess we have 9. If there are 9 questions in the statement of task, then there needs to be some sort somewhere in the report, there needs to be a roadmap so the reader can actually find the responses to those key points we were asked to address. So we don't like things hidden away. If we're asked to do something, we don't want to hide away our response to that piece of text, a piece of task. So basically then the people who do the reviews will be people like the ones listening in. There'll be members of the community. It'll be broader than just the science community. There will be people who experts in technology and in human exploration and diversity and those other things we're asked to address. And they will basically be looking there to see, is the committee making a strong case? the prime issue is, if we make a recommendation, is the material in the report that backs up that recommendation? The Academy likes its reports to be complete in the sense that they are self-contained, that the information needed to justify whatever we conclude or recommend can be found in the report itself. And so that the reviewers are looking at that. There are other questions as well about, is the statement, is the summary an accurate reflection of what's in the report and things like that. So more mechanical things, but basically it's responsiveness to the statement of task.
Thank you, David. While we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, let me remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, you can access the Google Doc. It's actually a Google Sheet through the OPAG website. If you go to OPAG, the meetings part of that page of our web page, go to the OPAG 2020 Fall meeting page and scroll down under September 1, Tuesday, which is today. You'll see below the area that says break, there is a link to click on that's called Decadal Survey Document, and that will take you to the Google Sheet where you can post your question. Looks like we have a couple more questions that are being typed in right now in real time. David and Robin, while we're waiting for those, were there any other things that you wanted to bring up or comment on for this particular audience?
Yeah, I want to just expand very briefly on something Robin said a few minutes ago, and that is that when we came up with our candidates, both for the steering group and the panels, for almost every individual, we identified alternates because we didn't expect everybody to say yes, every one of our first choices to say yes. But I was greatly surprised that in almost every case, our first choice said yes. Robin said there were two people, I think two people on the steering group who said no. And on each panel, there was maybe one or two people. So of our 90 odd members, we probably had maybe 10, maybe a dozen who said no. And what surprised me even more is most of the people who said no were actually senior members of the community who declined because of uncertain teaching requirements in the current public health crisis. Very few of the early career people we asked to serve said no.
And some people that were senior that declined said, in essence, it's time for the next generation to do this.
That's true. Several people said, yeah. I'm too old to do this. You want somebody younger. And by old, they weren't in their 70s and 80s. They were in their 50s and 60s.
Yeah.